Everybody hear me?
Yes. Yes.
First of all, everybody, welcome. Thank you for coming. I hope I don't disappoint you. What I want to speak about, really, I mean, obviously it's right down the road. It's only 3 weeks from now, basically. So clearly there's an enormous relevance to this particular lecture this year. However, besides that, the enormous relevance, I want to try to really in many ways demonstrate something. We think that we know the reasons for Jewish holidays, right? We think we know, what's the big deal? I mean, we've gone to how many Rosh Hashanahs? That's all you want, right? But clearly we've gone to many, many Rosh Hashanahs. And, in each experience, of course, hopefully, we're able to negotiate with God. That's really what it is. Although it's very hard to negotiate with the judge. But the Rosh, in many ways, as we will see, is really on our side. However, there are many different questions that we can ask about Rosh Hashanah. What I want to show you, really, and in many ways, this year has several objectives. One, obviously, is to tell you the information about what Rosh Hashanah really is about. What really happens on Rosh Hashanah? Now, to most people, that's a very, what? I mean, you're going to tell me what happens on Rosh Hashanah? We all know what happens on Rosh Hashanah. It's a day of judgment. We all know that. That's elementary. You can stop any kid in school and he's going to tell you it's a day of judgment. So what am I going to say? And how can I even ask the question, what really happens on Rosh Hashanah? But not only that, I want to demonstrate something else, which in a certain sense is even more important. As you will see, most people do not know what happens on Rosh Hashanah, as you will see. So the real question is, what about the other Yom Tovim? I mean, if Rosh Hashanah has such a depth, such an incredible understanding, which we will see, then what that would indicate is that every single holiday, or rather every single day that is commemorated by Jews, even Tisha B'Av, clearly is more profound than what most people imagine. So my purpose here is not only just tell you the information about Rosh Hashanah, what really happens, but really to try to demonstrate to you that every single thing a Jew does, and I'm only involving myself, obviously in the aspect of Yom Tov, like Rosh Hashanah and so on. Every one of them has a tremendous amount of depth, opinions. And I don't necessarily mean Kabbalistic either. You don't have to go to Kabbalah to figure out the depth of something, because that's a whole different world. That's a whole different dimension of understanding anything. No. There's an enormous depth to Rosh Hashanah, not at the level of Kabbalah. Kabbalah, of course, is much deeper, and it's more closer to the cause and so on. But there's a tremendous depth to Rosh Hashanah in terms of Rosh Hashanah itself, in terms of the hashkafa itself. So as such, I want to demonstrate and therefore create what's called a precedent, that every holiday, one can look at it in an incredibly profound way. And that's its beauty. Not only that, once you understand what really is going on, you then understand something also very important, and that is the mitzvahs which are connected to the day. Every holiday has certain mitzvahs, whether it be Minat Torah, biblical, or Midrabana, rabbinical. Why do we have these mitzvahs? What do they have to do with the day itself? As we will see. And what I'm going to try to do is bring a greater clarity to the whole understanding of shofar. Because the real mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is shofar, obviously. There's also the concept of tefillah, but there's also the concept of korbanos. But certainly shofar is one of the greatest of all mysteries. But what do you need it for, really? I mean, we can have all kinds of symbolic references to shofar. And Rav Saadia Goin, right, he gives 10 reasons why you have shofar. And they're all true. But is that what it's all about? I mean, shofar is really only reduced to being a symbolism of something? Or is it something much more profound in the way God runs the world? Well, we're going to take a look at that. So, in order to really dramatize this idea that Rosh Hashanah and all holidays have a tremendous profundity to it, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And of course, everybody here, based on your own understanding, you're going to know the answers, of course. Maybe. But if you don't know the answers, you're going to ask yourself, wow, how come I never thought about that? And he's right. If I cannot answer this question, so then what do I really understand about Rosh Hashanah? Okay? So as such, I'm going to begin this year with a series of questions. I ask for your patience, but you'll see that each question really is very striking, because the answer should be so obvious that it's not easy to understand. So, first question. What is the essence of Rosh Hashanah? Which is really what the whole title of this year is. What really happens on Rosh Hashanah? What is it? It's a question. Now, of course, if I ask that question to the audience, what would the audience say? Come on, it's Yom HaDin, the Day of Judgment, right? What's the problem here? Well, let me ask you something. Imagine you live in New York City. Well, unfortunately, I do. But you live in New York City, right? And all of a sudden, you know, the government, the mayor, Bloomberg, says, okay, we ran out of money. Almost. You know, the courts are now going to remain open for judgment one day a year. Do you know what would happen on day 2? Well, think about it. The courts are only open one day a year, right? It would be chaos. Every criminal in New York would have a field day for 364 days of the year, right? Because there's no judgment. There's no judgment. So the question is, this doesn't make sense. How could there be only one day a year that there's a judgment day? That doesn't make any sense. A person is involved in doing mitzvahs and sins every day of the year, isn't he not? So we would expect that there should be judgment basically after every day. So it doesn't even make sense. What does it mean that there's a judgment on Rosh Hashanah? Which essentially means there's a judgment for one day of a year. That makes no sense. No society can survive on one day a year judgment. It would be a pandemonium. Interesting question, isn't it? You see? First question already doesn't make sense. Next question. It's a contradiction. There's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that says, Odom Yid B'chol Yom. A person is judged every day. Oh, now that makes sense, right? A person is judged every day. That makes sense. So isn't that a contradiction to Rosh Hashanah? How can a person be judged every day and Rosh Hashanah is judged once a year? Like, what does that mean here? Are there different things of judgment going on? What does it really mean? Because we know that Rosh Hashanah really is, everything is judged, is it not? Your livelihood, your life, what kind of a year you're going to have. It's all, your health, everything is judged from the beginning of the year. So the question is, what does that mean? If the Gemara says that a person is judged on every day, in every day. Another question. We know that every Jewish holiday has a historical Jewish antecedent. Means it has a reason in the calendar of Jewish events, does it not? For instance, Pesach. What's the historical event that Pesach refers to? It's Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? Shavuos, the giving of the Torah, right? Sukkot, whether it be according to Machlokes in the Gemara, whether it be the Sukkot or the clouds, whatever it be, every single holiday, Tisha B'Av, has some type of previous historical event of which we refer to when we do the mitzvah of that holiday. So then the question is, what does Rosh Hashanah have to do? Where's the Judaism in Rosh Hashanah? That is the question. What does Rosh Hashanah have to do with Judaism? Now, some people will say, wait a minute. We know Rosh Hashanah is when Adam Rishon was created. When is Rosh Hashanah? It's Aleph Tishrei. It is the first day of Tishrei, is it not? Yes. So we know Aleph Tishrei. What happened on Aleph Tishrei? Adam Rishon was created, right? The world was created in 25th day of Elul, Chofei Elul, and 6 days later is Rosh Hashanah. What was done 6 days after creation? Right? Adam Rishon was created. So that we do know, that Adam Rishon was created on Aleph Tishrei, that we know. But let me ask you something. Didn't I say that every Jewish holiday refers to a specific Jewish event? Was Adam Rishon Jewish? You know, last time I checked, I don't think so. Right? So what does it mean, Jewish? I mean, she's not Jewish. I mean, it's true that he's the first human, right? He and his wife, right? But he's not Jewish. So then what does it mean? It would seem that Rosh Hashanah is the only day that violates that rule. That has nothing to do with Judaism. It has to do with what? Mankind. Correct? And it's true that Rosh Hashanah is a judgment of mankind, is it not? But somehow we borrowed Rosh Hashanah and we made it Jewish. Right? We made it Jewish. So then the question is, there's got to be something Jewish about Rosh Hashanah, besides that it's a holiday of a mankind holiday, that it commemorates the creation of the first man. There's got to be something Jewish about it, right? I mean, after all, we did things in honey. We have honey, we have challah and honey, we eat challah. There's got to be something Jewish. The question is, what is it? A Yom Adin is a day of judgment. Why is it on Rosh Hashanah? Why is it on Aleph Tishrei? The truth is, a day of judgment, even if it's going to be once a year, can be any day of the year, really. So why does the Rosh say that the judgment day is on the first day of Tishrei? What's unique about the first day of Tishrei that the day of judgment would be on that? Now, here's another question. Last time I checked, animals have no free will, right? We have free will. Animals have no free will. So the question is, if you look at it in the Masonic Clicker, which is one of the major piyutim, right? That was written hundreds of years ago, 700, 800, actually 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It says they called boya oilem. Everybody, anything that exists, clearly living creatures, are judged. So then the question is, how do you judge an animal? Animals don't work by free will. They work by instinct. So an animal cannot be culpable. It cannot be chayiv. Cannot be guilty. A tiger looks to eat. A tiger's not guilty of murder. A tiger kills because it wants to eat, and there goes dinner. We don't look at a tiger that is culpable for a sin. There's no moral infraction that a tiger does. I mean, obviously, get out of its way because you don't want to be killed. But nobody would ever morally put a tiger in judgment and say, you are guilty of murder. It's absurd. There's no free will. So then how does everything get judged? Simple question. But somehow it confronts your understanding of Rosh Hashanah, because it doesn't make sense. Yet we do know that everything is judged. Another idea. You have an idea what it feels like to be judged, that you're going to live or die? I want to show you something. A guy goes to court, and let's assume he's up for murder. Right? He's up for murder. Okay. So he's got to show up at a certain date. Right? So on the date, let's say he's got to show up Tuesday. Whatever. He shows up Tuesday, but before he shows up, the night before, he has this incredible festive meal. All the goodies. Whatever the guy likes. Steak, duck, tongue. That's what I like, right? So I assume that's what he would like, right? So the question is, how in the world is this guy eating as if nothing is going to take place the next day? You're going to be judged. We are going to be judged if we live or die. What are we celebrating here? Not only that, we make sure we get the best food, and we bring over the whole family. You know what I'm saying? What are you talking about? The guy sitting at the head of the table is about to be judged. He's going to live or die, right? What is he celebrating? You know what people look like when they're on trial for life and death? Right? They look like they're ready for the morgue. They don't look like they're about to celebrate something. So how in the world could Rosh Hashanah be a Yom Tov? And notice when you walk out of shul, what do you say? Yom Tov. Excuse me, Yom Tov? I mean, that's got to be the biggest confrontation to what you believe Rosh Hashanah is all about. How can a day of judgment of life and death be a Yom Tov? That is the question. Now, what's interesting is the Malachim, the angels. So they come to the Rosh and they say, if this is a Yom Tov, so why we should be saying Hallel, right? Because what do we say on Hallel? What do we say on Yom Tov? We say Hallel. So that means we should be saying Hallel. Could you imagine Jews saying Hallel on Yom Hadin? It doesn't make sense. It is completely incompatible and inappropriate to the entire happenings of the day. So what are the Malachim talking about? He said, how about Rosh Hashonah? So what does the Russian answer? Because the Malachim are addressing God, right? So the Russian's got to answer him, right? So he says, I'll tell you, you guys have an interesting point, but it's not appropriate. You know why? Because since the books of life and death are open in front of me, you really can't say how that. Wow. You mean the Russian is saying something that we would never have thought about? That the books of life and death are open, and therefore you can't say how. What's obvious? What are the Malachim even talking about? What are they talking about? I mean, okay, the Russian answers that, but you'd look at the Malachim and say, you guys better get your act together. What are you asking me this? The books of life obviously are open. You're asking me to say Hallel? What kind of question is that? Now we know that the IQ of Malachim are off the charts. We know that. The IQ of a Malach is beyond comprehension. I know that many people think that they're smart. However, I guarantee you, you're not smarter than a Malach at all. His IQ is off the charts. So if we can figure out that we don't even have the question of why we should say Hallel, I'm sure that a Malach clearly would not have that question. So the question is, what is he talking about? What are the Malachim really talking about? Also, when we look at the day itself, we say what? We say, in Musaf, we say 3 types of tefillas. We say Malchus, where we declare God as king. We say Zechroinus, where we ask God to remember the good deeds of our ancestors, and so on. To remember them, and please, take that into consideration. And then we talk about Sheforos. We mentioned the concept of a shofar. There's a whole series of psukim that mention the concept of a shofar. The question is, what is the logic of this, really? If you're a lawyer and you present a defense, the defense has to make sense, right? It has to answer the charge. So what is our defensive argument by offering these 3 topics? Because that's really how you have to view it, as a defensive posture. So the question is, how do they defend themselves, especially the concept of shofar? What does this have to do with the defense? Then the next question is, what is shofar all about, which I mentioned? What is it all about? What is this mystery of shofar? And we know that there's tremendous weight applying to shofar. Shofar isn't just a mitzvah. It is the real mitzvah of the day. Sukkot has a ton of mitzvahs. Pesach has a lot of mitzvahs. But in Rosh Hashonah, that is the essential mitzvah, is shofar, is to hear the shofar. So the question is, what is it? What's so important about it that we need to hear shofar? What is the mystery behind shofar? That is the question. And then there's a pasuk that says, Ki choyach Yisrael, that the shofar is, think about shofar, Kessin b'yom chagenu, Ki choyach Yisrael, it is a choyach. A choyach is that which is not understood. Umishpat le'elokei Yaakov. Why this differentiation? You mean, to us, it's a choyach. We don't understand its rationale. But to God, it's a mishpat. What does that mean? It's a judgment to God. You see, what does that pasuk really mean? So therefore, that's a question. Also, if you ask yourself, when we blow shofar, what are we really doing? We are really emulating the sounds of crying. That's where it emanates from. We have Tkiya Shram Tur Tkiya, Tashra, or whatever. So a Tkiya resembles a human wail when it cries. A person cries, he has a wail. Then a person will sigh, where he won't cry, also it'll break. That's a shiver. And that represents the sighing of a person while he's crying. And then a person will break down into a staccato, and so on. I'm a poor imitator. But anyway, he'll break down into a staccato. That's called a trua. And then he'll do another wail. That's really what the sounds of a shofar are all about. The question is why? Why does a shofar have to imitate the sounds of human crying? That is the question. And then we have another question. It says that, we blow shofar. Why? At different times, because we want to confuse, or the wording is, we want to confound the son. We want to confuse him. We want to get him all discombobulated, as they say, and so on, because we're hoping to stop him from prosecuting, because that's what he does. Last time I checked, the Satan is 5,771 years old. Since that time, we have had 5,771 Rosh Hashanah. Now, if we take a look at Judaism, right, the Jewish history, right, we've had approximately, let's say, 3,300, right, Rosh Hashanahs. I would think that a person would have figured out by now that on Aleph Tishrei, they're going to blow a shofar, right? I would think that anybody has an average IQ would have figured out that by now they're going to blow a shofar. The question is, so why is he confused? What is this? You know, I want to tell you something. The greatest, the most intelligent being you will ever encounter is the Satan. How do we know that? Because he always gets us to sin. He's the greatest psychologist ever known. He's the greatest strategist. This guy, this Satan has an IQ which is beyond belief. Because we're always sinning, unfortunately. So this guy's got to be absolutely brilliant. Einstein would look like a kindergarten kid to the Satan. So you would have figured out, but that by now you'd figure out what's going on. And you wouldn't get confused. So what is going on? How can we possibly confuse the Satan? That is the question. Also, we read the Akedah on the second day. What is it about the Akedah? Is it merely because we bring the schus of Avraham Avinu? Because Avraham Avinu took his son and was going to sacrifice him? Is that what it's all about? Or is there some profound mystery that the Akedah refers? In other words, the Akedah is not just we ask God to remember what Avraham did. No, the Akedah is a critical defense that we use besides shofar. Is that what's going on? And the last question I will ask is, why is Aseret Simei Tshuva after Rosh Hashanah? I would imagine that Aseret Simei Tshuva should have been before Rosh Hashanah. Make a lot more sense, right? It's like, you know, after you break the keli, now you're going to repair it. Then what'd you break it for in the first place? Why did the Bershom say you have to do Tshuva 10 days before Rosh Hashanah? I would imagine that would have helped a lot better than doing Tshuva after Rosh Hashanah. Okay, for those who have been counting, I have asked 16 questions. The incredible thing is that you actually all sat through it. Now, you're probably looking at me and say, this guy, he either knows the answers or he's out of his mind. Because I have now proposed questions that each one is really very puzzling, you know. So the real question is, no, I'm not out of my mind, so I'll tell you right now. At least that's what my wife says. Although she says sometimes, I am out of my mind. However, I will not refer to that. The truth is, it is possible to answer all of it in one shot. How? How does somebody do that? And the answer is that if you understand the real meaning behind a holiday, you can answer everything with one thing. That's the beauty of truth. That's the beauty of profound truth. Is that you're able to look at many questions and answer to one thing. Why? Because all of the questions are really nothing more than an ignorance of the theme. And they're nothing more than manifestations of the ideas that lie in the theme. And that's what I would like to try to do. To answer these questions with a specific theme, all of them. And then you really understand Rosh Hashanah, what it's all about. All the acts of God can be summarized in three ways. There are three principles, or three areas, that all the acts of the Ribono Shel Olam can be go under, in the sense that they can be understood through these three actions. It's amazing that one can organize all the acts of God under three areas, but it's possible. The first area is called Hanhoga, which means the actions, or the conduct, or the behavior. Hanhoga Sakiyum. What does that mean? Kiyum means the fulfillment. It means God will do a certain amount of actions in order to create what's called the stage, the arena that man has to function in. In other words, the Rosh has a specific idea that he wants. He wants the creation to come to a certain intended place. In order to fulfill that purpose, he's going to create the universe. He's going to create everything. The upper spiritual worlds. He's going to create this world. So therefore, all the acts of God that are involved in creating what's called a stage, in which the play can take place, and we are the actors on the stage, the Rosh creates. So that involves almost an infinite variety of actions to create the spiritual worlds, to create the universe, the stars, the earth, the water, the sun, everything. That's what he does, which is an enormous amount of actions. And he creates it in such a way where everything is designed that the purpose of creation will be fulfilled. Or else what's the point of it? In other words, everything has an explanation. It must either do the fulfillment or it has to contribute to the fulfillment of the Bria. If it doesn't, it disappears or it was never created in the first place. That's how tight the acts of God are. Now, obviously, most of the things that God created in order to be part of the fulfillment of his purpose, we have no idea. There are 300,000 different species of beetles, for those who are curious. I didn't say 300,000 beetles. There's trillions of beetles, if not quintillions or whatever, octillions or whatever. There are 300,000 different species of beetles. In other words, where one beetle looks different than another beetle in terms that it's a different species, which is astounding. You mean to tell me that the Russian created 299,999 species, you mean this world wouldn't work? And the answer is, it wouldn't. That's how tight the Bria is. Every single thing that the Russian created must contribute to the purpose. Obviously, most of which we have absolutely no comprehension. Interestingly, when a species no longer contributes to the fulfillment of the Bria, terminated. That's why animals go extinct. Man cannot extinct an animal species. We're not about the bottom here. The Russian allows a species to go extinct. Why? Because its purpose has been fulfilled. We don't know what the purpose is. Yes, but that's how tight, to use that word, how stringent the Russian is. Everything needs to have a reason or rationale to exist. If it doesn't, it's out, it's gone. That's how tight, that's how strict is the entire Bria. I mean, if you look at the amount of entities in the Bria, the amount of atoms and so on, each thing needs to be for the fulfillment. So therefore, the Hashonah Sakil, the conduct or the actions of God, that God does in order to allow the Bria to reach its intended fulfillment is exact, precise, far more than we can imagine. So that's really a large series of actions. Fine. But is that the only category of actions? No. There's another one. That's called Hashonah Mishpat. The actions that God does in the concept of justice. What does that mean? The Rosh has given mankind, even going, free will. He's given. Not everything we do is free. A great percentage of our actions, believe it or not, have nothing to do with free will. They are compelled, but we do not know when they are compelled or free. Why are they compelled? Because the Rosh wants somebody to suffer. He's going to make sure that he gets into a car, and he's going to make sure that he drives down a certain road, and unfortunately, there's an accident. Or, even worse, there's a traffic ticket. Right? No, it's not. That's what they say about Israeli cops. But anyway, what does that mean? Therefore, obviously, this man's choice, there was no choice. Okay? However, a large part of our life does have free will. So what the Russian does is he waits. Since we have free will, we need to choose. We have options. And options means you need to choose. The Russian waits until we choose whatever he chooses to give us. Okay? Now, whatever the Russian gives us is specifically for us. Every Jew that exists because he is necessary to fulfill the purpose. Each of us has a specific purpose to accomplish in this Bria. that is not replicated or duplicated by any other Jew. You need to fulfill this purpose. This is your contribution to the ultimate fulfillment of the Bria. That's why there are so many Jews. The purpose has been subdivided into millions of Jews over all the thousands of years, and ultimately, at the end, all the Jews will have fulfilled their purpose. That's how exactly it is. Who you are, what you will be, who you marry, how many kids, all of this is part of the Nisoyan. Nisoyan obviously doesn't mean Nisoyan means temptation, but it is part of the scenario that you need to go through to fulfill your purpose. Therefore, that's a second set of actions. Therefore, while you choose, you're going to obviously make a choice. That choice is going to have consequences. That's mishpat. Judgment means, and a verdict means consequences to your act. The Rosh has so arranged the creation that everything has consequences. Everything. In fact, in a Jew's life, almost whatever he does from microsecond to microsecond has consequences. Why? Because there are 6 mitzvahs tmidius, which you can always fulfill. So some people, they always think about the Rosh, they think about emunah of the Rosh, we talk on whatever. So they're actually fulfilling a mitzvah, right, while they're seated. Other people are not thinking about that. So even the time we spend is part of the scenario of what we do to fulfill the purpose. But the Rosh waits, we do what we do, and after we do it, the Rosh responds with a verdict. Okay, I like what you did, the Rosh says, and therefore I'm going to not reward you, but I'm going to increase your opportunity. God rewards nothing here, as it says. The schar mitzvah by halma leka. There is no reward for a mitzvah in this world, for obvious reasons, and I'm not going to go into that. However, what the Rosh does do is he will increase your opportunities to do more mitzvahs. That is a reward in itself. It's like a guy works for a bank and he starts out as a teller. Okay? He does a good job. So in comes the VP, sits down with the guy and says, I like the way you're doing your job. I'm going to make you, right? I'm going to promote you from teller to an officer. And now you get to sit behind the desk. So the guy's going to look at the guy and says, well, who cares? But the guy's not going to say that. Because to be an officer means that not only you have more opportunity to do work, but you make more money. You get greater vacation pay. And maybe your pension plan is larger. Who knows? So what has this person done? He hasn't rewarded you. He's given, because you still have to work. Reward is only if you don't work, obviously. If you've got to work for it, this isn't the reward. What it is a recognition of your work, and now I'm going to give you the ability to do more work. But better pay. That's the key, right? So that's the nature of the reward that the Rosh does. So I wouldn't call it reward. I would call it opportunity. How do you say that in Hebrew? Hizdamnut? Whatever it is. But that's how the Rosh deals with people. Later on is the reward. And the reward clearly is incomprehensible. That's why the Rosh cannot reward you here, because it's incomprehensible. You can't give it here, because this world is finite. In the world to come, it's infinite, and there you can get the reward. That's one of the main reasons why you cannot be rewarded in this world. But in any case, this is the concept of mishpat. However, it could also be bad. The person could look at you and say, okay, I don't like what you did. So therefore, I need to wake you up. And the person could give you a wake-up call, which is a patch. In Yiddish, a little slap in the face, and all of a sudden you say, uh-oh, what's happening here? And if you're wise enough, you'll realize that God is telling me something. And so on. And then there's the wake-up call, and then there's a severe wake-up call, and then there's the beginning of harm to your possessions, and then it slowly creeps up to your body. There are all kinds of ways that the Rosh does. But fear not, the Rosh is unbelievably merciful. And what's the definition of mercy? The suspension of justice. That's what the definition of mercy is. The Rosh is incredibly merciful, and it will take him you've got to do a lot of bad things for him to come down on you. That's how merciful he is. But I'm not going to dwell on that. But all of this is the concept of Ahavas HaMishpat, which is those actions which God does in order to do what? In order to satisfy the acts of man. That's Mishpat, judgment. Okay? Now, that's interesting. I've categorized all the acts of God in two fundamental categories. Those acts which he did to make sure that mankind or the Jews should fulfill creation. And the second thing is that they go about trying to fulfill creation. They go about doing their deeds. And God will respond consequentially, in consequences to what they did. However, there's a real big problem. What is the problem? The problem is the survival of the entire creation. Why? Imagine if all the Jews got together, and they said, we're tired of Judaism. You know what we're going to do? We're going to read the Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to do the exact opposite, 24/7. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Forget about it if it's possible, and you'll see it was. Well, we're going to sin 24/7. Well, how do we know what a sin is? So we're all going to go to yeshiva to learn Shulchan Aruch, right? It's an interesting motive for them to do it. And we're going to do the exact opposite. Now, forget about why the Jews would do this. Obviously it's lunacy. But let's assume, could it happen? Yes, it could happen. There's a possibility. Of course, it's highly remote, but there is a possibility. Now, what happens if it happened? And all the Jews sinned. What would that mean consequentially? It would mean that the will of God is frustrated. Because now mankind cannot get into Olam Haba. They did not fulfill the purpose of creation, and God is stuck. That's what it means. It means since God gave us free will, it is possible to frustrate the will of God. I'm not saying it's likely to happen, but it's clearly possible. Yes, that's no good. This is nicht good, as they say. Lo tov. Why? Because do you know that it did happen? Yes. When did it happen? Noach. What did mankind do? I'm not saying they studied the Shulchan Aruch. Right? They didn't need to. But somehow mankind got together, however it was, and they sinned grievously. To such an extent where God said, Nichamti es asher asisem, I have charata, that I made man. Why? Because the whole place was sinning. And what was the consequence? The destruction of mankind. We have to thank God that was one guy and his kids that did not fall in line with the rest of mankind. Because if Noach did, that's the end of the human race. What the Russian would have done after that, I don't know. But we have to realize how close mankind, it's not just mankind, it's how close the world was standing at the brink of non-existence. Therefore, it happened. That's the problem. If it happened, that's a major problem, because the Russian says, I am not going to allow mankind to frustrate my will, even though he has free will. Well, how's the Russian going to solve this? So the answer to this is a profound new set of actions, which Rabbi Sato labels as the Anhogas HaYichud. What God does is this. He says that I'm now going to institute a series of actions that nobody understands for the specific purpose that they will guarantee the existence of man no matter what they do. However, those series of actions are concealed. It's a kilmastater. Nobody knows how they work and why. In fact, what we do see is that they are irrational. They don't make sense. That is the true reason behind the enigma, universal enigma, or the central problem of theodicy, Rosh v'toivloi, tzadik v'raloi. Right? It doesn't make sense. If there's really mishpat, why do we see tzaddikim gemurim? I'm not talking about your local tzaddik, or partial tzaddik. We see tzaddikim gemurim, whoever they are. Each person has his idea of what tzaddikon is, and so on. Right? They suffer terribly. And we see evil. Guys who are really evil, unbelievably matzliach. They're beating in after these evil people. So to us, none of this makes sense. In fact, it's one of the primary reasons why people abandon religion. It's the problem of theodicy. How do we explain the nature of evil? Therefore, these actions really, its mystery is solved in the concept called the actions of Hanhogas HaYichud, the actions of the Yichud, of the one God. Why? Because normally, a person, God, is really subject to justice. But these actions do what? They guarantee the creation exists further. This is not justice. Nowhere in justice does it say that I have to guarantee that the guy is not going to go to prison or where the guy's going to get out. No. He committed a crime. It's too bad, you know. You did it, you suffer. There's no such thing as, okay, now I gotta make sure that you're going to get out of prison or make sure you maybe never got to prison or whatever. You know, there's no such concept as rehabilitation in justice. This is an incredible chesed. That the Rosh decided that no matter what mankind does, he cannot destroy my creation, and there must be Jews in Olam Haba. No matter what they do to themselves, I will make sure that there will be Jews in Olam Haba for eternity. We all know what the definition of Olam Haba is, or rather we all know what the experience of Olam Haba, and that is infinite bliss eternally. That's what the Rosh decided. Therefore, the Rosh created a whole series of actions that guarantee the existence of the Jews in the future world. Even though we have free will, now to pull that off requires unbelievable depth of actions, and we don't know. And there are many reasons why we cannot fathom this. But it exists, and therefore the world must continue no matter what. And that's the real secret behind the fact that once the Jews were chosen to be the people that will fulfill creation, they can never be annihilated. That's why. Why is it the Jewish people can never be annihilated? And why is it the Torah can never be completely forgotten? Because those are the two essential elements that demand the fulfillment of creation. That's the covenant that God made with Avraham, that your descendants will do the job. How? How does the Rosh guarantee that? And that's the concept called Hashonah Yichud. Those actions which will guarantee. Now, it's important to know that a great deal of the actions that God does, He employs a certain device. What is the concept of tikkun? Or rather, what is the purpose of creation? It's called tikkun, rectification. What the Rosh did is he created the Bria in a certain state of existence. But he made it deficient. He damaged it. That's what he did. Why? Because he wants mankind to fix it. And that will be their job. And if they do the job, they will have rectified creation. And based on the merit of that doing the job, they will get infinite existence eternally. In other words, the Rosh decided that he's not going to give Olam Haba, the future world, for free. Mankind must work for it, specifically the Jewish people. And therefore, this is what they have to do. They need to earn this idea. Therefore, what the Rosh really is doing is he's guaranteeing that the creation will have a tikkun, will have a rectification through the Jewish people. And it is impossible to stop that. There is nothing in creation, like the Rosh said in Ha'azinu, you know. Ani achaye, you know. I give life, Ani menes, and I destroy. There is nobody that can save anybody from my hands. If I want to do a guy in, he's finished. There is nothing in creation that has the power to counteract me. And if I want to give a guy a good time, if I want to give him life, there is nothing in creation. I don't care what it is. All the armies of earth cannot stop even one iota of the will of God. That's how powerful he is. So the fact that he has an Hashonah Yichud is phenomenal for us. Because we know the Jews cannot cease to exist. That's the promise God made. Without going into, we always see that and so on. Now, therefore, to do the tikkun, what is the tikkun? God, the fundamental problem with this creation is God absented himself from this creation. We don't see him at all. He removed his presence, or more accurately, he denied your ability to see his presence, which is far more accurate. God doesn't remove anything, because he's all over. But what the Rosh has done is that he has denied us the ability to see him, and he's all over the place. He's here, but we don't don't see anything. That's what he's done. It is our job to bring him back. We need to bring God back. Yes, because he wants to re-enter creation. When he comes back, that's the tikkun. Why? Because that's the rectification of what he did. He absent himself, which means he made it impossible for him to see us, or for us to see him. And he comes back. That's what the Jews have to do. There are 3 ways the Jews do this. Why? The first way is mitzvahs. When we do the commandments, what we're really doing is bringing God back, without going into the mechanism. However, God knew that many Jews will not do mitzvahs. They will not do the commandments. So then how does God come back? And the answer is, he gave a secondary device, and that device is called tshuva, repentance, which means you can undo a sin. Tshuva is different than all other mitzvahs, because it's really a backup plan. You see, all mitzvahs those are the commandments. But what happens if you sin? What do you do now? So he created a specific mitzvah called tshuva, which is the ability to undo, literally, what you did, which itself is a ness, because the whole thing is erased in creation. But God knew that many people are not going to do tshuva, or they're going to do a half tshuva. So what's the bunch of them going to do? So he gave a third device, and that's called yisurin, or suffering. Yes. The concept of suffering isn't the concept of retribution. It is the concept of tikkun. That's the concept of suffering. It's identical. If a guy's got to go into a hospital to have surgery because he's got a tumor, that surgeon isn't punishing the guy. That surgery is going to save the guy. That's the same concept of suffering for Jewish people. In fact, it's really the same concept of suffering for all mankind, but certainly for the Jews. And therefore, suffering is also a tikkun device. It enables the tikkun where God will always return. Who brings God back? We do. But who's the guy who leads God back? The Mashiach. That's what the Mashiach does. Mashiach is a regular person. Actually, he's not a regular person, to say the least. But he is certainly an individual that will bring the Rosh Hashonah's presence back after the Jewish people have done the tikkun. You see? So he's waiting for us. He'd love to come today, tomorrow, before Rosh Hashonah. We're the guys holding him up. So the Mashiach waits for the tikkun hakloli. Important term. Tikkun hakloli means the total rectification of creation, and then the Mashiach enters, and it's over. That's the end of the test. Everything has been fulfilled, and from here on, it's all sunny Florida. What can I tell you? That's your vision of what it's having a great time. So, you know, want to call it utopia, whatever, but that's what happens. Now that we understand this, we now can begin to understand Rosh Hashanah. You see, this is what you have to know. Now, based on this, what is Rosh Hashanah? Okay, imagine a guy goes into business. Okay, opens up a store. Yes? What does he have to do? Well, he wants us, let's say, selling items, shoes, right? But what does he have to do? Every periodically he has to reassess his business. Am I making enough profit? Do I have too much inventory? Is my marketing good? Is my distribution? What about my supplies? There's a whole series of things that he needs to do periodically, once a year. He needs to take inventory, right? Every business needs to do that to see if they are succeeding or not. People don't. If you open a business, you need to do this. Because if you're losing money, you need to know that, and you need to correct the problem. So therefore, every enterprise, and I'm going to go from the concept of business to the concept of enterprise. Any enterprise needs assessment. It needs evaluation, doesn't it? Well, guess what? Doesn't creation also need an assessment? Of course it does. The whole concept of kiyum, the whole concept of fulfilling the purpose of creation, the whole concept of tikkun hakloli needs an assessment. Where are we standing? Where's the spiritual state of this world? You see, where are we standing? That is the question. And what the Rosh needs to do is inventory. He needs to look around, so to speak, and look at everything. Okay? Where are the Jews? What are they doing? What are they doing to the Jews now? Right? What country are they in? Are they doing the mitzvahs? Are they not doing the mitzvahs? Are they learning Torah? What are they doing? In other words, how far advanced are we in the tikkun, in me coming back. That's what he needs to do. Just like any enterprise needs to do that. Okay? Is that called a judgment? No. It's called an assessment. It's called an evaluation. This is the secret of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day of assessment. However, what happens if you make an assessment and you find there's something wrong, right? I got too much inventory, right? Or this supply is no good. Or my profit margin is too small. What are you going to do? You're going to readjust, or else you go bankrupt, right? You're going to readjust. Rosh Hashanah, both things happen. One is the reassessment of what? It's not judgment, really, per se. It's reassessment, or rather, it's assessment, evaluation of the whole creation. To see how far are we doing this job? How far are we in bringing the universe to its intended purpose? Based on that assessment, everything is readjusted. And that's not the good part. For us, that's what's bad, you see. Because what happens if you're not doing such a hot job? Because in other words, the Rosh said, I'm going to make you a multi-zillionaire. You're going to have a lot of money, $100 million, right? So all of a sudden, God makes you pick stock. You pick stock and zoom, there it goes, right? And all of a sudden, overnight, you're worth $100 million. Or you win the lottery, whatever it is, right? The question then is, I won the lottery and so on. Why? The Russian wanted to put you in that situation and to see, well, what mitzvahs are you going to do if you win the lottery? Or if your business goes up? You see, even that's a test. So the Russian waits a year. And let's assume the year passes, and the Russian says, hey, you didn't do anything. You've squandered the wealth. All you did was take a vacation in the Bahamas, right? All year long. You didn't do a thing, right? So the Russian looks at you and says, I needed you to do this because that's your purpose. You're not doing it. So guess what? I'm going to change your circumstances, right? What does that mean? That means you've invested millions of dollars or whatever in a stock, and guess where the stock goes? It plummets. And overnight, you're now worth 50 grand. Why? Because it's not that you've been judged in terms of guilty or not. You've been judged in terms of where do you fit in the adjustment? Where do you fit in the tikkun? This is the problem. You see, it's an overall understanding. It's like you have a factory, right? And your manager, your factory needs adjustment. It needs evaluation. And periodically, the boss is going to evaluate his factory. What happens if he finds that a manager isn't doing his job? So what's the guy going to do? What the boss will say, listen, first of all, warn him. And if the guy doesn't listen, he's going to change his job. He says, okay, you're a manager, but I don't want to be a manager now. I'm going to reduce you to being a clerk. So is he guilty? Was he judged in terms of his sins? Well, yes and no. What he really was judged in terms of the tikkun process. Is he doing it or not? That's what Rosh Hashanah really is. You see, that's its essence. It's not so much it's a Yom HaDin, but it's a day of evaluation of the whole tikkun process. In that process, you are judged as to what are you doing with that process. You see, so it's almost like indirectly the Russian looks at it. Now, wait a minute. The Russian is an all-knowing being. He's omniscient. He can do this in an instant of time. Let's face it. When somebody wants to have a factory and he wants to do the assessment, it takes some time. It takes him a week. Weeks. The Rebbe, as the commissioner says, the skira achas means he looks. And this is only Kaviyachol, he doesn't even do that. He looks at one side, and in a nanosecond, he has surveyed everything and decided where the tikkun is and what's going to be changed. So the question is, what's this whole hullabaloo? Hullabaloo, whatever. Like all of a sudden the Rosh said, well, Rosh Hashanah is now going to come, right? And this is what I'm going to do. Why is he even telling us? He doesn't need us. He doesn't have to tell anybody. It's not like a factory boss who needs his workers to do the inventory. He doesn't need that. In an instant of time, he knows exactly what is and what has to be done to continue the process. So the question then is, why is it happening? And the answer is, because that's the chesed. Normally a guy would have said, listen, you're not doing something, let me change your position. But what the Rosh is doing is something else. He said, listen, I don't want you to suffer. I want you to remain, or I want to enhance your position. So therefore, I'm going to publicly notify the Jews that I'm about to conduct an inventory. In other words, I want you to change the verdict. That's why. And that's an incredible chesed. He didn't have to do this at all. But the Rosh doesn't want to do the evaluation. He wants to allow us to allow the input to change the verdict for the better. And therefore he told us about that on Rosh Hashonah, on Aleph Tishrei, I'm going to do my evaluation. Please, for your sake and even for mine, because I love you people, you're all my kids, you're my children, please do tshuva. So the verdict will be that you can remain, and not only that, I'm going to even raise you higher and give you a greater opportunity to do what? To do the kiyum of the bria, to fulfill the purpose. You see, so Rosh Hashanah is one of the greatest chasadim ever known to man, to Jews, because it allows us to influence the verdict. And that's why the Rosh publicly notified everybody. And this obviously is an incredible concept. Now that we understand this, it's very interesting. Now, what happens, however, if a guy doesn't do tshuva? Let's assume we just don't get the message. Guy doesn't do tshuva, or he doesn't do enough tshuva, or he's not serious about it. You know, on Yom Kippur, right? The first thing we do after Yom Kippur is a quick ma'ariv. Wait a minute, how could you do a quick ma'ariv if you just, you think that the whole significance of the day is with you, so you at least let your first ma'ariv be with kavana. Oh no. We're through it, we're home, and we are eating. Right? And I want to tell you something. I'll avoid all the resolutions we did for Rosh Hashanah, Tinatzes, Tshuva, and Yom Kippur should last more than a week. You see? So we're stuck. This is bad news. Because the Russian knows who we are. Come on, we know who we are, right? New Year's resolutions, even my God. They never last. They don't last past New Year's. So what does the Russian do? That's a big problem. Big problem. So here's what the Russian does. He loves Jews. He wants them to fulfill the tikkun of the bria, the rectification of creation. He wants to improve our life. He wants to do all of this. Why? Because A, he loves us, B, he's our father, and C, we're his kids. That's why. Simple enough. However, what's going to happen? Because the Rosh cannot play games on Rosh Hashanah. There's a sultan over there. There's a sultan. He's prosecuting us. He's not exempt from prosecution on that day. So the question is, he's sitting there screaming his head off. Him? You want to give him a break? Give me a break. Right? This guy's guilty already. He gives a list of 100 different things he did in one day. Forget about a year. So the Rosh can't say to the sultan, excuse me, chocolate. He can't. That's a mockery of the justice. He can't do that. Because this is official. God is officially a judge, sitting there, whatever, right? And he's judging every neshama, right? And there's a sultan being a katri, prosecuting. So what's the Rosh going to do? It's his kids on the defendant bench. You know what I'm saying? What does he do? Thank God that God is God. And he figured out the solution. We would be in quandary. He's in no quandary. So he does this. And this is, if you think about chesed, first incredible chesed, is that he actually tells us what's about to happen on Hashonah. So at least we can try to do truth. But what about all those guys who are slackers? And so on, and guys who have half an idea. What about the guys who say, God, I'll really think about it. I'll really think about doing tshuva. I can't promise you anything. I'll give it some thought, What about those guys? So here's what the Rosh does. Incredible thing. He says, here's what I'm going to do. And you'll understand. Once you understand this, you understand all the questions of Hashonah. You'll all answer. Because each question points to a different segment of the problem. So what does Rosh do? Rosh says this: I'm going to give you the ability to do what? What was the guarantee, the backup system, the real guarantee? That was called, remember the third actions God does? Right? Those are the actions which are mysterious, which we do not understand, but the ultimate purpose of that is that they guarantee our existence. Even though we have free will, that's what they do. So in many ways, even though it may involve suffering, those are the greatest things we can use. It's like, thank God there's a hospital that can do surgery. Because what happens if he couldn't do it? You're finished. So therefore, Rosh says this: I am going to give you the ability to ask me to look at you, and if you don't do tshuva, to now act towards you through the actions of Anhagas HaYichud. Yes. Even though I do it generally, but I'm going to actually allow you to specifically ask me to do it for you. And therefore, when the Baruch Shem does that, if the Baruch Shem says, well, I'm now going to conduct or look at you in terms of that I need to get you into Ilam Habo, which is primarily not so important to look at the tikkun process or to judge you how good you are. So therefore, what does God do? So as soon as Klal Yisrael does that, and now you understand what shofar is. Shofar is the request, please, if you can't get us into Ilam Habo because we don't deserve it, get us in on the third series of actions. Get us in on Anhagas HaYichud. Means do what you have to do, but get me into Ilam Habo. So the Baruch Shem says, I'm going to allow you to ask me that. As soon as the Baruch Shem hears the shofar, and that's the secret of the shofar, which I will explain how and why, God gets up from Kisei Mishpat, right? And he goes into Kisei Racham, which is the seat of compassion. Wait a minute, judges don't get up and go into compassion. Their job is to judge. But it's not the Rachamim that we think of, which is a suspension of justice, which, by the way, is what happens. It's that he goes into the room that nobody knows what goes on. It's that Anhagas HaYichud. It is those series of actions that will guarantee us existence into the future world. So he gets up and goes into that room, and he just leaves the court, right? And he goes to the room, and that's what he does. You see. Now that you understand the general workings of Rosh Hashonah, let us now go over the questions, right? And you will see all of them are answered by this. Because you now understand what's going on. What's really happening here? Okay, what is the essence of Rosh Hashonah? That was the first question. Well, the essence is not a Yom Hadid per se. It is really a day of evaluation, right? Or assessment. That's really what it is. Why is it once a year? Of course. You need to assess only once a year. You can't do this every day. How can you do it every day? Because you need to, whatever you want, you can input whatever changes you need to be made, and you have to let them spell out. You have to let them occur. You need to give time to allow that which you changed to work. So therefore you do an inventory check once a year. You don't do it every day. There's no time to allow that which you did to work itself out. That's why Rosh Hashonah is once a year. Wow, makes incredible sense. And because it's not truly a day of judgment the way we think of justice, courts. No, it is a day where a boss evaluates the whole creation. That can only be once a year. Because whatever readjustment you made needs time to work itself out. You need to give it a year to work itself out. However, there is justice every day. There are consequences to different acts every day. You see, which is not part of the evaluation of the Bria. It's part of your job. Your specific job. The Moshe is trying to get you to do your job better. So in that case, he's looking daily, well, are you doing your job? So when I come to evaluate, you'll be doing okay. So there are two kinds of judgments here. You see, one is an evaluation for how you fit into the whole grand plan, and the other is the idea of how do I get you to do your job. You know what I'm saying? Not to punish you, but I don't want to wait until I get to Rosh Hashonah, all of a sudden you bombed. You never did the job. So there are two different kinds of processes working here. One is the business or the enterprise evaluation, and the other is the evaluation of your job today. How did you do it? Because the Rosh wants to correct it on a much more frequent basis. They're going to wait till the end of the year. You see, that's why in that case it's nidim b'choyoyim. Is Rosh Hashanah part of Judaism? Doesn't seem so. It's part of mankind's history. So the question is this the only day that breaks the rule that Rosh Hashanah is part of mankind, Jewish history? And he says, of course not. Of course Rosh Hashanah is Jewish. Of course it's Jewish. So you look at me and say, well, what's Jewish about Rosh Hashanah? The answer is based on another question. Always Jewish ways to do it. Was Adam Rishon Jewish or not? That's the question. We know he was a man. Minu Anushi. Was he Jewish? And the answer is yes and no. Yeah. Of course, I'm not here to confuse you, right? But what does that mean? Adam Rishon was not Jewish. What is a Jew called? Well, the real name of a Jew is called Ivri. Avram or Ivri, the Hebrew. That was our original name. In other words, the national title of the Jewish people is called Hebrew. We're the Hebrews. However, the name changed as we went further down Jewish history, right? After the splitting of the 10 tribes, right? All of a sudden there was a split. And the majority of the Jews who became, the 10 tribes were exiled. And the only ones left was Yehuda, Benjamin, and Levi. But since Yehuda was the major population of Jews, so therefore the name of Jew became Yudah, Yud, Yid. So the name Jew comes from really the word Yehuda, because they were the majority of the Jews left. So Yehuda is a national term. It indicates we descend from Avram, the Hebrew. Okay? Was Adam Rishon Hebrew? And the answer is of course not. Well, the Hebrew, why? Because Avram Avinu came 2,000 years after Adam Rishon. So the question then, what was Adam? And the answer is, the answer to another problem. Does it make sense that God would wait for Avram Avinu for 2,000 years for a Jew to appear and do the tikkun? Of course it doesn't make sense. You don't want to open a business and start 2,000 years later, right? So the question is, why did he do it? And the answer is, of course not. Avram Avinu had the unique ability to do the tikkun. Not getting into why, that was the agreement. You do the tikkun of the Bria and your descendants. But what about before Avram? Why would God wait 2,000 years for the purpose of creation to begin to be fulfilled? And the answer, of course he didn't wait 2,000 years. On the get-go, he did it. Adam Rishon, he was a Masakin. Adam Rishon had the power of a Jew. In fact, he was infinitely greater than a Jew. Because one man had the ability to do the tikkun of the entire creation. Astounding, the power of this man. In fact, he was so great, Adam Rishon, that the angels started singing Shir to him. They thought he was God. That's what his neshama looked like. It was only after sin that the Rosh split it and whatever. Therefore, Adam Rishon, he wasn't the Hebrew, but Adam Rishon was something else. Do you know what he was? He wasn't the Hebrew. He was a Yisrael. That's the difference. The term Yisrael doesn't refer to the national identity. It refers to your ability of the neshama to do the tikkun. That's what it refers to. It happens to be, thank God, that the Jews can do the tikkun, therefore they are called Yisrael. In fact, it took 3 of us to get them to name Yisrael. Avram wasn't called Yisrael. Yitzchak wasn't called Yisrael. Who finally got it? Yaakov. Because the Rosh said, I want to wait. I need 3 generations to keep the Messiah, the tradition, and if the 3rd generation keeps it, he now gets the title of Yisrael, which is the ability to do the tikkun. All the Rishon had that from the get-go. Because in the beginning, God never had in mind that the tikkun should be done through one nation. That's not fair. The Rosh is Sadik v'Yosha. Why would he give it to only one nation? Of course not. He gave it to mankind. And that's what Adam Rishon was. It was only because Adam Rishon failed, Cain failed, heaven was murdered, and the rest of the world for 2,000 years sinned. Until the Rosh wiped him out with Noach. But Noach was also Yisrael, but he wasn't a Yehudi. You see? And then if they fail, until the Dor HaFlaga, they want a war with God. Finally, the Rosh said to Avraham Avinu, I'm tired of this. These guys refuse to do the tikkun. They don't do the mitzvahs. Therefore, you will be Yisrael. It'll start with you. And that's the concept of Bris Ben Absarim. That's the true, profound significance of what the Bris Ben Absarim is, which we read in the Chumash. That Moshe made an agreement that I'm taking away the ability of all the other people to do the tikkun. No more. You're the only one I'm leaving it with. That's what the concept of Goy appeared. That there was actually a non-Jew. And notice there's no such thing. It's funny, we call, what do we say Goy? We say Jew and non-Jew. What's this non-Jew? Why don't we say nations? Because Goy really means nation. But somehow we never refer to that in our speech. You ever notice? We say Jew, and he's a non-Jew. What do you mean he's a Jew? What is that, a non-entity? Like, what does non mean? As if the only thing that matters is Jew. So you're either a Jew or you're not a Jew. Because if you're not a Jew, who cares what you are? I don't have to identify what nation you are. The main thing is, you're not Jewish, so who cares? Like, what kind of an idea is that? Do you ever wonder about that? And the answer is, because a non-Jew is a non-Jew. He's nothing. You're either Jewish and you can do the tikkun, or if you're a non-Jew, you're nobody. Because you can't do tikkun. So you can ask me, so what do they exist for? Right? That's a very powerful question. If I just got finished telling you previously that creation is tight, and that if you're not doing the tikkun, you don't exist, and therefore non-Jews should become extinct. Why are they not extinct? Because the answer is, the Rosh had Rachmanis. Remember, he's still the father of mankind. And he doesn't want the non-Jews to lose the ability of tikkun. So he said that I'm going to give you a task, because without a task they don't exist. Your task is, guess what? Is to help the Jews do the tikkun. Wow. Just check out history in light of this idea. The Goyim have been helping us. I mean, the UN, Russia, and the PLO, and Syria, you mean, and Egypt, and all that. You mean they're contributing to us? Of course not. That's their greatest undoing, because they don't even understand that they're not even engaging in the purpose that they exist. Now, if a guy wants to be Jewish, he can become a Jew. God left open the way of Gerus. Fine, because it's not fair to shut out mankind. In other words, mankind as a nation can no longer do it. Only a Jew has, and that's why a Jew has an incredible kind of neshama that traverses all the worlds. Whereas a Goy only has a nefesh that's connected here, but I'm not going to get into that. So the Moshe had Rachmanis, and he said, listen, as a nation, it's over with. I gave you a chance. And that's also the Medrash where it said that God went around to every nation at the time of Matan Torah, and he asked them, do you want it? That was the last chance that they could have come in as a nation. And God said, you guys don't want it, it's over with. However, I leave the door open for any individual. See, therefore, what's the purpose of a Goy? I mean, it's stunning to hear that Goyim really need a purpose, or else they don't exist. And the answer is to help the Jew do the mitzvahs. You know, and I don't want to talk about what they're doing now and so on. But they'll all come to understand that someday. That's their purpose, you see. Or they can become Jewish and enter the tikkun process. One or the other. Therefore, we see something that the name Yisrael was taken away from the Goy. Because there was no such thing as a Goy, because there was no such thing as a Jew. It's only with the entry of Avram, the Jew, that they became the non-Jew. You see? So if you're a non-Jew, who cares what nation you belong to? You really have no purpose in existing. If it wasn't for the chesed of Rosh, you wouldn't even be here. Therefore, this is the concept of Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon was a Yisrael, the greatest Jew, in quotes, who ever lived, if you want to use that word. Infinitely greater than all tzaddikim, because he had the ability of one man to do the tikkun. He failed, so therefore ultimately the Jews have the name Yisrael. So Yisrael refers to the spiritual ability of the Jew. That's what it refers to. Hebrew or Jew refers to their national identity, which is the children of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, right? However, when you call a Jew a Yisrael, what you're really saying is that you are greater than the angels. You can do the tikkun no malach can even touch the Bria. What is the tikkun? Wherein lies the power of a Jew? Or rather, what is the power of a Jew when he does the tikkun? Do you know what it is? There is nothing more powerful than a Jew. You know why? Imagine if you could tell God what to do, and He would listen. Would you consider that powerful? Unbelievable. You walk on a beach, right? You see this vase or this oil lamp, and you rubbed it, and out came the genie. And he said, okay, you got 3 wishes. You know? And all of a sudden, you had a friend with you. What would that friend do? He would try to become your best friend overnight. In fact, instantly, because you're the most powerful man of all. Because a genie can do anything, right? Okay, imagine if you could tell God what to do. And the version is infinitely greater than a genie. What would you do? Wow. I mean, tell me who the guy is, because I want to win the lottery ticket, right? Because he can get the Russian to order the bria the way I want it. That's what a Jew can do. A Jew can influence God's movements inside creation or out of it. That's what Jew is. We can bring God back, which means that God voluntarily moves into creation or out of it, depending on the acts of the Jew. There is no greater power. No monarch can do that at all. You see. So that's what Adam was. So if Adam was really a Yisrael, okay, he wasn't Jewish. But therefore Rosh Hashonah or Aleph Tishrei is what? Is an Israelite holiday. Right? It's a holiday of Israelis. This word. Strangely speaking, or rather ironically speaking, Rosh Hashanah is an Israeli holiday. Not a Jewish holiday. Isn't that interesting? Because it originated with the first Yisrael, Adam Rishon, because he had that power. Only 2,000 years later did Avram Avinu pick up that power. So therefore, wonder of wonders, the only real legitimate Israeli holiday is Rosh Hashanah. You see, that's the concept. So it is Jewish in that sense. You understand? And you also understand who the concept, who Adam Rishon really was. Now, why therefore is the evaluation done on the day of Rosh Hashanah? Because think about it. If Adam Rishon started the whole process, that's the inauguration. When you open a business, generally speaking, you wait a year, and then you evaluate the business on the day you opened it. Well, when did God go into business, so to speak? When did the enterprise begin? It didn't begin on Chaf Elul, which is the 25th day of Elul, which is when creation was there. You know, you don't begin the business when they're building your store. You know what I'm saying? You rent it, or then they have all kinds of improvements. You don't begin your business. You begin the business when the inventory is stocked. You open the door and you're in business the first day. What was the first day of business? Rosh Hashanah. Because Adam was created, that was the first day he was commanded to do, he failed. That was the beginning of the whole concept of bringing God back. So therefore the day is judged, the inventory that is, the evaluation, is actually judged on the day that the business started. You see. Now, why are animals judged? Of course you know why. Because it's not a judgment day, it's an evaluation day. So therefore, God has to decide, well, let me see, how many beetles do I need to exist to keep the fulfillment going? So it's not that they're judged, but they are moved. They are moved in order to allow the fulfillment to go. For instance, God decides that he's angry at Spain because they kicked out the Jews. Okay? So what does the Moshe do? He looks at Africa. And I don't know if you know it, but there's all kinds of locust swarms in Africa. A locust is a very interesting creature. A grasshopper actually changes into a different creature called a locust. A locust is different than a grasshopper. Yes, the body transforms. And then trillions of them fly. Because grasshoppers jump. Locusts fly. They don't jump. They cross the Mediterranean. You know, there are swarms, trillions of locusts. They darken the sky. And they fly over the Mediterranean and they land in Spain. Guess what locusts do? They eat. Imagine trillions of locusts eating all the fields. Yes. So what did God do? He judged the locusts and he said, that's the guys I want. Those are the shlichim. And therefore, I will move the locusts into Spain as a punishment. That's the judgment of animals. He doesn't judge animals because they're not culpable. They're not guilty. What he does do is they're included well, it's necessary for the tikkun of the bria. the rectification of creation for locusts to punish Spain. So therefore, they're included in the evaluation. It's not a judgment. But Kol Bo Olam is judged either because they're guilty or not, they're doing their job or not, or I need to manipulate them to fulfill the purpose of creation. And that's really what is going on in terms of animals. Now, why is Rosh Hashanah Yom Tov? Remember that question? It's incredible. Who ever heard of having a celebratory meal, right? You bring out your best stuff, food, you got your guests. This is crazy. The next day, or rather that night, you are going to be judged if you live or die. And the answer is, what? It's because we know that God is going to move from the seat of justice to the seat of the room where He guarantees your existence in the future world. That's a holiday. You know what it's like? It's like you're a guy, you're on trial, right? And you're very influential. You're a mafia kingpin. Okay? What do? You bribe the jury. So you get all your guys, they contact the jury and they find out. They bribe the officers and they bribe everybody, right? And they just bribe the police to get you a list of where these guys live, right? And you all of a sudden contact each juror and you say to them, you know, I will make you an offer that you will not refuse, right? And of course, all 12 people in the jury, remember that's exactly what they have, besides the alternate juror, right? And all of a sudden, you know that the next day when they come in, guess what the sentence is going to be? Not guilty. Well, you know that. But you have to go through the motions of the trial. But you know what the verdict is going to be. Therefore, you're not concerned. I mean, it's a little bothersome, it's a little annoying, but you're not that concerned. That's why Rosh Hashanah. The fact that we Jews can go home and celebrate and eat great stuff, whatever you have to, filter fish, whatever's going on, and so on and so forth, means that we're not worried. What do you mean we're not worried? Because we know the verdict is going to be, don't worry, you'll make it to Olam Haba. That's what we know. That's why Rosh Hashanah is really a Yom Tov. You see? Because we know we're going to survive. Why? Because the Rosh Hashanah said, I promise you that you will survive. And now you understand what does it mean. Tzadik Hashem b'chol drocho. That God is a tzaddik, justice. V'chosed b'chol ma'aso. But in everything you do, you're going to survive. Because the Rosh Hashanah is a tzaddik. The fnim mishus, I should say mishus that did. He's going to judge you. But it's the fnim mishus that did. You will survive. That's a chosed b'chol ma'aso. God is both. That's what's again. Fabulous. So won't come the Malach and say, wait, let's be consistent here. You know, if it's a Yom Tov because we know they're going to survive, let's say how already. And you're right. I mean, if you got the whole thing jury rigged, so to speak, right? The whole thing is going to be nothing more than an exercise in what? In just going through the motions. So let's say how because we know in the end they're all going to survive. So that's what God says. You know, you guys got a good point. However, not so fast. Listen, guys still got to go through the justice. He still got to go through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You know, Hallel means you have to be totally joyful. If there's impartial joy, because you've got to go through the rigors of being tried, of you have to testify in front of a prosecuting attorney, this is no picnic. Therefore, you cannot say Hallel. Hallel is either it's all joy, partial joy, you cannot say Hallel. You can't say Hallel. That's what the Rosh Hashanah answered, which is beautiful. We understand the beauty of the conversation here. Look how logical it is once you understand what is going on. And what do? What's our defense? Well, now you understand. What is the essence of what you try to do in Rosh Hashanah? Tshuva. Right? So the first tshuva is, you're the Melech. Because what was the problem? Why do we sin? Because in many ways, either we do not believe God is the king, or we have not accepted His sovereignty. Malchus, you're king over the entire world. Like Kessin once said, so beautifully, he said, do not forget on Rosh Hashanah, while you're making God king over the whole universe, don't forget to make Him king over yourself also. That's what Kessin said. It's a real brilliant observation. What goes on? But that's Malchus, kingship. That's what, okay? You need to be, you're the king, we acknowledge. What happens if that doesn't work? Zechronis, okay? Forget about my tshuva. Let me rely on the tshuva or the godless, right? The merits of my forefathers. So that's zichronis. So that's the next defense, right? What happens if that doesn't work? It's not enough tshuva, and somehow the actions of my forefathers can't cut it. Shofars, please, Rabbi, go into the room where you decide and get us out of this mess. You see, it's like a guy who walks over to the judge and says, listen, do me a favor. I don't like the look of the prosecutor and the jury. Forget it. Hey, forget it. Do me a favor. Get out of this courtroom. You know, why? Because you're my father. Please. I realize that it's your job to do the judging, but please, get out of the courtroom. Do me a chesed. So your father hears you. He's the judge. He's the Supreme Court judge. He says, okay, I've given you guys permission to do that. If you request it. You requested it, he gets up. And everybody's looking and they're stunned. Because he is the boss. He's the king. And he's the judge. He gets up, walks right out of his room, goes into his private chambers. He does whatever he has to do to get you off the hook. That's precisely what happens when we say shofars. You see, so those are the three types of defense. Now, what is a shofar really? Well, a shofar is what? A shofar is a statement to the Rosh, please activate the Anhuz HaYichud. Get into the room where you will guarantee that we survive. Even if we don't understand what you do it. That's the secret of shofar. In fact, if you take a look at the psukim we say, when we say shofar, right? Kodesh, Shavosi, Shemati, and so on, and those 6 psukim that we say before we blow the shofar, if you look at the first letters of all of them, it spells out Korah Satan. The Satan is ripped apart. That's what a shofar does. It's actually telling us what happens, except we don't realize that shofar destroys the kittul. Korah, it rips the Satan apart. That's what the shofar does, you see. So therefore, as a result of that, it's an entire different judgment. And now you understand. Why does it say, think of the shofar, the chodesh shofar, blow, right? Kessin chagenu, ki chod hu to Yisrael. Why? Because we don't know what actions God does. It's a choik. It's mysterious. That's what a choik is. A choik is a mitzvah that we do not understand the explanation. So to us it's a choik, because we have no idea what he's doing in that room. But we do know that that room is where he knows what to do, and that he's making us that we will exist. To him it's a mishpat, because he knows exactly what he's doing. And that he's making sure that we get into Olam Haba, right? Infinite bliss eternally in the right way. Even if it involves mishpat. But as far as we're concerned, we have no idea how it operates. So to us it's a chayk, and to him it's a mishpat. You see how beautiful the understanding is once you understand the whole concept of what shofar is doing. Why does it have crying involved? Because that's really what we're saying. We're saying, Rabbi Shalom, even if we have to cry, suffering, do it. Just get me out of this courtroom with this prosecuting attorney who's a sultan and get me into Olam Haba. It's like a surgeon, please operate. Save me. Even if it means operate, because you got to get on the table and it's terrible. Go through an operation, whatever. Better that than death. That's why the shofar is saying what? We're crying and saying, please go into the room which may subject us to suffering, crying, you see, in order for us to survive. That's why the shofar emulates the concept of crying. Why is the sultan confused? Right? This guy's brilliant. And the answer is, of course the sultan knows what can happen. If the Jews blow shofar, it's over with. What's he hoping? That the Jews won't blow shofar. That's what he's hoping. Because if they don't blow shofar, it won't happen. And that's why the Gemara says, any city that doesn't blow shofar is going to have a bad time that year. Why? Because they have not employed the device that can save them. That's what he's not confused. He's too smart to be confused. He's confounded. He's frustrated. Because he's hoping the Jews are not going to blow shofar. And if they're not, he's got a job. But all of a sudden, he hears the shofar, right? All over the place. In every community of Klal Yisrael. And he says, rats! Or whatever epithet he says. I have no idea. Right? And then all of a sudden, because when God gets up, his job is over. There's nothing he can do. He's only an employee. What's he going to do? And he walks out. Maybe next Rosh Hashonah. See, that's what really goes on. Okay. Now, but the question is, wait a minute. This sounds nice and lovely, as they say in England, right? This sounds nice. Wait a minute. Where do we get the source to do this? Where do we get the merit to walk over to God and say, please get out of the courtroom? Let me get out of the courtroom. The whole day is me in the courtroom. It's like I was hired, or my essential function this day is to be a judge. How can you ask me to get out of the courtroom? You see, based on what merit? Because even though we are as kids, the court situation is not a mockery. It's not where God plays judge. You know, because we see that if you don't blow shofar, bad news. So the question is, even if we blow the shofar, so what? Why should God do it? Merely because we request? Or merely because we are His children? No, not sufficient. We need something else desperately. That's our merit. What is that? The Akedah. Now, that's the secret of the Akedah. The Akedah gives us the merit to request to God to get us out of the world. Okay? Why? Why does the Akedah do this? Avram Avinu, he's sleeping. And all of a sudden he hears a voice. He gets up, right? He looks around. And all of a sudden he's in a prophetic trance. And God is talking to him. And Rosh says to Avram Avinu, I want you to do something. He named me. I'm here. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your son, your only one, the guy you love. I want you to slit his throat. Yeah, you know, kill him. For those who don't understand, slit his throat. Right? Now, Avram Avinu is listening to this, and he is absolutely stunned. Why? Because Avram Avinu is human, isn't he? And he also feels for his kid. I mean, we're not talking about a robot. He's a human being. What's he thinking about? In his mind, he's going bananas. What does that mean? That means he's thinking of the following difficulties. Each one is in his son. Each one is a killer item. Okay? The greatness of Avraham Avinu is he ran through it the second, and he said, I don't care. That's how great he was. For him, for us, it would be forget about it. An obstacle we could never endure. For him, Vayashkim Avraham Aboika. What was the Nisoyis? We need to understand that. Nisoyin one. Excuse me. I'm about Chesed. About Chesed means I love people. I want to do good for people. You're asking me to kill somebody? That's the exact opposite of my midah. Problem one. Problem two. You're about Chesed. You're a punishment, the greatest Chesed of all. How can you ask me to terminate somebody else's life for no reason? Problem two. Problem three. Avraham Avinu understood human life. Even without Chesed, Avraham Avinu understood what is Tzelem Elokim. Do we understand the value, the greatness, the significance of a human life? No. This generation or mankind clearly doesn't. Because they slaughter people like there was no tomorrow. They have no concept of what a human being is. Tzelem Elokim. And so therefore Avraham Avinu says, how can I kill a human being? I mean, you want me to shech the rooster? Fine. But you want me to shech a human? Impossible that God should request this. Nisayin 3. Nisayin 4. Excuse me. That's my son. You want to shech my son? Impossible. He's my son. That's Nisayin 4. Nisayin 5. Not only is my son, he's a Jew. You want me to kill another Jew? No, impossible. Nisayin, was that Nisayin 5? 6. I think so. Nisayin 6. He's the last Jew. He's not only Jewish, there's nobody after him. Because he's the guy that what? That's supposed to have the Jewish people. If I kill him, it's over with. So not only is he my son, not only is he a Jew, he's the last Jew. Do you want me to kill the last Jew? Come on. Okay, 6 Nisayos that were terrible. Now Avraham Avinu went right through it. But the last thing stopped him. The greatest Nisayon of all. Number 7. what is the greatest Messiah? I will tell you. Here's the problem. If I don't understand why God does something, that's an Messiah. Tzaddik v'toivloi, or rather tzaddik v'raloi, Rosh v'toivloi, why does bad happen to good people? Why does good happen to bad people? Look, I don't understand the logic. It doesn't make sense to me. But okay, it's not illogical. It's just unknown. It doesn't make sense. Somewhere there has to be an answer. Fine. However, can it be, right now it's night outside. And I say, it's not night outside, it's day outside. That cannot be. It's a contradiction in terms. That's called mutually exclusive statement. Means if A is true, B cannot be true. It's not logical, it's impossible. And if B is true, A cannot be true. That means they are mutually exclusive. The truth of one will exclude the truth of the other. What was the problem by Avraham Avinu? Here's the problem. The Rosh was Avraham Avinu. Ki b'yitzchak yikor lecho zora. Your descendants, the Jewish people, will emerge from Yitzchak. Right? Fine. That means Yitzchak will live to have children. Now God says, and Yitzchak was not married. Remember, Rosh said, I'm sorry, you need to kill him. Now, that's two prophecies which are mutually exclusive. Now we know dead people cannot reproduce. The last time I checked, dead people cannot have children. So, if Yitzchak dies, which is the command now, he cannot have kids, which means that the prophecy of Jews cannot be. Therefore, the Rosh has issued two prophecies which are mutually exclusive. They cannot be. Which means that the Rosh has now appeared to Avraham Avinu as irrational. God irrational? That's what it is. The Rosh hasn't appeared to Avraham Avinu when he told him to do something and Avraham Avinu doesn't know the answer. No. The Rosh has contradicted himself, and the Rosh will never contradict himself. This is the greatest Messiah of all Avraham. Why? Because Avraham Avinu was an incredible philosopher. Brilliant. He was either Makkah at 3 years old, and I don't have to tell you what kind of intellect you need for 3-year-old Akora, or at 48, whatever it was, the man was brilliant. And therefore, the greatest challenge to truth would be an impossibility, irrationality, or mutually exclusive commandments. That would be his greatest Messiah, because he's so logical. That Messiah was a killer. Why? Because it was impossible. He had to ask himself, who is God? This doesn't make sense. God is the greatest logical being of all. Look at what he created. Everything is unbelievably beautiful, purposeful, with design. How can he issue two commandments or prophecies, whatever, which are mutually exclusive? He couldn't. How do you deal with that? You can't. So what Avraham Avinu said, okay, this is irrational. Now, we know that it wasn't irrational. Why? Because notice, the Rosh, and Avraham was right, the Rosh never said kill him. He said, alei li oilo, bring him up for an oilo. That's all I said, is just put him on his back. I didn't say anything wrong. You see, so God never was irrational. But it was meant for Avraham Avinu to think that it was irrational. But the Rosh never was irrational, because he just said, alei li oilo. Just bring him up for an oilo, and then you'll take him off. But Avraham Avinu obviously followed the conclusion that if I bring him up, what's going to happen? I ain't going to take him off. You see, that's what the Rosh wanted. Therefore, why did God do that? Why did the Rosh? So Avraham Avinu was incredible. He said, listen, none of this makes sense. Not only does it make sense, it's impossible. I can't believe this is God. However, he exists. He is the supreme being. I don't care. I suspend my judgment. I suspend my ability to think logically. I suspend my entire intellect, and I do what he wants. Finished. What does that mean? And the question is, why did the Russian do this? Why? What do you do this for? And the answer is, because of Rosh Hashonah. So he knew someday the Jews are going to be in hot water. They need an out. They need an exit. That exit is which appears to everybody as irrational. So Rosh said, they need a schus. So in the merit that Avraham Avinu said, I'm going to do it even though you appear irrational, I'm going to give the Jews the ability to ask for me to act irrationally, which is Hashonah Yichud. Neither can make it neither. You see, it was the Akedah that did it. Because Avraham Avinu bypassed the test of irrationality. Well, it cannot be. What is Hashonah Yichud? The acts of God in that chamber is irrational. It appears to us as irrational. For God to save us all, to get us into Olam Haba, He needs to do this. Nobody knows what He does. Kalim is not there. Even the Satan doesn't know what He does there. No Malach knows what God does in that room. That's how secret it is. And to us, it's completely irrational. So the Moshe set up 4,000 years ago a source that we can ask for Him to be irrational or to appear rational, which is the backup system, the guarantee that we will survive. Why? So He gave Avraham Avinu the test, the greatest test of all, which is the test of irrationality. You see. So therefore, based on that, we read the Akedah and we say, Avraham Avinu, what he did, he buys through the test of irrationality. Please come to us and be irrational, which means go into the chamber when you appear as irrational, because that's the only thing that will save us. And the Rosh says, because that's what you ask. Based on Avraham Avinu, the source of Avraham Avinu is so great that neither can make neither. Just like he listened to my irrational commands. If you command me to be irrational, I do it. Not that God is irrational. However, it completely appears irrational. That's sufficient. And therefore, we zuycha through the Akedah to ask the Moshe to get out of the Kisei Mishpat and get into the Kisei Rachman. You see. And why is Aser Simei Tshuva after Rosh Hashonah, which is the 16th question, because I've already gone to all 15, right? Why is that? And the answer to that is because Rosh Hashonah is an appeals process. It's not the original judgment. Why? Because Elul is going to have to do tshuva, not Aser Simei Tshuva. When does real tshuva start? You know, the Sfardim start slichas now, right? What are you starting now for? You see? People think we blow the shofar every day. Why? Because tshuva is a process we begin thinking in Rosh Chodesh Elul. Therefore, when it comes to Rosh Hashonah, hopefully we will have done tshuva. Now, what happens if we didn't? Okay, so Rosh Hashanah is okay. There's the appeals court. What is the appeals court? 10 days. You see, that's how much the Rosh wants to save us. So we actually have an appeals court because he's hoping that now that we've gone to Rosh Hashanah, we're shaken up. You know, we're shaking because we've gone to Rosh Hashanah. And he's hoping now that now we will be what? We'll be motivated to really do tshuva. And in order to make sure that we can be saved, what the Rosh does is something unheard of. The gematria of Hasotin is 364 days. 364. That means the job of the Satan is threefold. He's the tempter, the Yetzer Hara. He is not only the tempter, he tempts you to do a sin. If you sin, then not only does he takes off his hat as tempter and becomes the makatre, the prosecuting attorney, prosecutes you. And if you are found guilty, he becomes the Malach HaMovis, the angel of death. Not that he kills you, but he is also responsible for the execution of the judgment. 3 jobs. So what the Rosh says is, listen, if you're in court, you know what I'm saying? I don't care if you're tempting the Jews on Yom Kippur. Okay. Doing executions, fine. Look, people sin on Yom Kippur, right? And people die on Yom Kippur. Or they get, whatever, accidents, whatever. But, I'm suspending you from one job. You cannot prosecute on Yom Kippur. You can't do that. You see, I just taken away one of your jobs. That means on the day of Yom Kippur, you cannot prosecute. Therefore, it's unbelievable. So imagine, on Rosh Hashanah, when God is sitting in the seat of judgment, there's the Kippur, prosecution. We need God to get up. But on Yom Kippur, what are we doing? We're fasting. We're doing everything we can to remove ourselves from materialism. That's why they are 5 in New Yom, to try to get away from materialism, to get into spirituality. Yeah, but wait a minute. We have a struggle with tshuva. Some guys say, think about it. Some guys say, of course I'll do it. And as soon as Yom Kippur is over, wham, they're doing the Avera again. People are very strange when it comes to tshuva. You see what I'm saying? And the Rosh knows that. So imagine if there was a prosecuting attorney on Yom Kippur. Not just the tempter and the judge, and execute the judgment. Imagine if there was a prosecuting attorney. What would happen? Then something, all of a sudden, some guy's doing tshuva, right? And all of a sudden, in his mind, he's saying, yeah, okay, I'll give it a couple days, but I gotta get back to what I was doing, you know what I'm saying? And also the suffering, of course, he knows, because it's coming up on Yom Kippur, and the suffering goes, as a prosecutor, Yom Kippur says, give me a break. You call that tshuva? You call that a tshuva? So he would have disqualified 80% of Klal Yisrael. Because how really, do we really do a tshuva shenema? So it comes out that if the Sultan is prosecuting in Kippur, what would have happened? He would have killed us. None of the tshuva would be accepted. So Rosh said, you go home, Sultan. There is no prosecution. Therefore, on Yom Kippur, any tshuva is accepted. Even a tshuva where a guy says, you know, I'm sinning. I realize I'm sinning, but I can't stop myself. Pressure's too great. Or my mother-in-law made me do it. I mean, whatever the factor is, you know what I'm saying? They give me mother-in-laws. But and so on, you know? I mean, and if the Malach was there, if the Sultan was there, they would have killed him. So I don't care who made you do it. What are you doing? But if the Sultan's gone, so what happens? Even though a guy says, and this is incredible, I cannot stop. But I realized I have charata. I know I'm wrong. I know this is wrong. I have charata, but I cannot stop. I cannot be mekabel also. That's tshuva also. Because even a charata, in fact, Chov Chaim says that the main thing in tshuva is charata, even if you can't stop. I'm not telling you to continue. But the essential idea is the recognition. You're wrong, you need to have charata. Not always do we have the power to stop. So in order to make sure that every tshuva, no matter what it is accepted, the Rosh dismisses the Sultan. You have any idea what kind of chesed that is? It's one of the greatest chasadim, because the Sultan was created to prosecute and to tempt and to execute the judgment. That the Rosh should send him home. And I guarantee it, he's gnawing his teeth. He's going out of his mind. Because he knows he could invalidate 80% of the tshuvas of Klal Yisrael. And he's finished because he cannot be in court. That's the chesed. Look how far the Russian goes to protect his kids. He warns us of the day of evaluation. You see. He says do tshuva. He gives us an appeal process. And finally, he sends the Sultan home. Wow. I mean, he's trying to give us a message. He's trying to tell us, do tshuva. Any tshuva will be accepted in the kippur. You see. Therefore, what has happened now? I've answered all the questions. Every one. You see? By understanding, the true understanding of what goes on here, and employing various concepts of hashkafa, all of you have a profound understanding of Rosh Hashonah. And I mean profound. Just ask anybody any of these questions. And they'll be stuck. Why? Because they think Rosh Hashonah is a Yom Adin. And all this stuff makes sense. But it's not, you see. This is the profound understanding. You even understand why it's a Jewish holiday, or forgive me, it's an Israeli holiday. You know? You even understand that, you know, and that's got to be the funniest part of the whole year. In any case, we now understand Rosh Hashonah, so I encourage everybody, including myself, to do tshuva, and to understand the unbelievable chesed that the Rosh Hashonah has toward Klal Yisrael. And ultimately speaking, you know, if we do the right tshuva, and we really conduct ourselves as much as we can, clearly the Mashiach will come before the next evaluation. Why? Because the tikkun process will have been complete. Thank you.
It's good. It's good.